Let me tell you something that almost nobody in this space is willing to say out loud. Every account you follow, every single one, is a decision. Not a diary, not a window, a decision. And Darcey Silva has been making that decision post by post, caption by caption, filter by filter for years. The follower count is real, the aesthetic is consistent, the brand is airtight. And for a long time, that was the whole story. A woman who understood the internet better than most, who turned reality television into a content empire, who built something genuine and lasting out of circumstances that would have broken someone with less drive. That was the whole story. Until a second account surfaced, a private one, running quietly in parallel under a name that is not Darcey Silva, with a follower count measured in the hundreds rather than the millions. And what that account contains does not just complicate the public story. In specific, documented, screenshot-preserved ways, it contradicts it. If this is your first time on the Tell-All Tapes, you need to know something about how we operate here. We do not speculate. We do not pile on. We follow the evidence where it goes. We present what is documented, and we let you draw your own conclusions. We have covered financial situations, relationship timelines, brand deal collapses, and behind-the-scenes dynamics that the network would prefer stayed behind the scenes. Every claim we have made has been sourced. Every claim we will make today is sourced. That is not a boast, it is a promise. And it is the reason this channel exists. Because in a space full of noise, you deserve something you can actually trust. If you are new here and you want to stay ahead of every story that the 90-day universe does not want you to find, hit like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications right now. The community that already lives here will tell you, we don't miss, and we are not missing today. Now, let us talk about what was found, how it was found, and why it matters in ways that go far beyond the content of any individual post. The discovery did not happen accidentally. Nothing like this ever does, not anymore. The internet has developed a specific class of researcher, dedicated, methodical, technically sophisticated, who apply genuine investigative discipline to public figures in ways that traditional media never anticipated and still does not fully understand. Metadata analysis, mutual follower mapping, cross-platform behavioral pattern recognition. The tools exist, the people who know how to use them exist, and when they have a reason to look carefully at someone, the probability of finding what that person hoped would stay hidden approaches 100%. In Darcey's case, the reason to look carefully came from an inconsistency, a small one initially, the kind of thing that most observers would scroll past without registering. A reference in a comment section that did not align with the public timeline. A tagged location that appeared on a third-party platform before it appeared on the verified account. A mutual connection between two accounts that on the surface had no visible reason to share an audience. Individually, each of these is noise. Together, they are a trail. And the researchers who found this trail followed it to its end. What they found at the end was an account that Darcey had been actively maintaining, posting to regularly, engaging with a small and carefully selected follower group, while simultaneously presenting an entirely different version of her life, her relationships, and her circumstances to the millions of people who follow the verified account. The private account is not old. It is not dormant. It has been running concurrently. That is the word that matters here. Concurrently. Not a past self, a parallel present one. I want to spend a moment on the architecture of what was built here, because it is genuinely impressive, even as it is genuinely complicated. Running a parallel account, maintaining two separate voices, two separate emotional registers, two separate relationship maps, without ever letting the language, the references, or the associations bleed across, requires a level of discipline and self-awareness that most people fundamentally do not possess. You have to know yourself well enough to know which version of yourself belongs in which space. You have to be organized enough to keep the content separated. You have to be controlled enough to make sure the people in one circle never appear in the other. For a significant period of time, Darcy pulled this off. The verified account continued performing exactly what it was built to perform: aspiration, abundance, twin connection, gratitude filtered through a lens that made everything look slightly more luminous than reality. The private account continued functioning as something entirely different, a space where the performance was off, where the captions were not calculated for engagement, where the voice that showed up was not the brand voice, but something that sounds considerably more like an actual person. The distance between those two voices is what makes this story significant. Because it is not a small distance, it is not the ordinary, understandable gap that every public figure maintains between their public presentation and their private reality. It is a specific, sustained, and in several instances directly contradictory distance. The public account says one thing. Around the same time, in the same week, sometimes in what appears to be the same emotional moment, the private account says something different. Not just different in emphasis or framing, different in fact. Let us talk about the categories of content, because not everything that was found on the private account belongs in the same conversation, and I think it is important to be precise about that. There is content on the private account that is genuinely private, emotional processing, personal reflection, the kind of unguarded self-expression that everyone needs somewhere and that nobody, regardless of their public profile, should be required to share with the world. That content is not what this episode is about. That content deserves the privacy it was posted with, and we are not going to be the channel that broadcasts someone's genuine private pain for views. That is not what we do here. What this episode is about is the second category: content that is professionally significant. Content that touches on public statements, commercial relationships, and documented contradictions between what Darcy has said publicly and what she has posted privately around the same period. That category is fair game, not because it is entertaining, but because the people who have commercial relationships with her public persona have a legitimate interest in whether that persona represents a complete and accurate picture of the person. And because the audience that has invested years of loyalty and attention and emotional energy in the public account has a legitimate interest in understanding the terms of that investment. Here's what falls into that professionally significant category. The private account contains commentary on her own public content posts that describe the production of the public-facing material in language that is specific and pointed and entirely absent from anything the verified account has ever acknowledged. We are not talking about vague references to the difficulty of being a public figure. We are talking about posts that describe specific content decisions: what to post, what not to post, what to frame in which direction, and why, with the kind of insider clarity that you can only have if you are the person making those decisions and you are processing them somewhere the audience cannot see. The implication of those posts is significant. Because the public account has always been presented as something close to spontaneous, a natural overflow of a life being lived rather than a content operation being managed, the private account posts suggest a level of strategic calculation behind the public account that the public account itself has never once acknowledged. That gap between the appearance of spontaneity and the reality of calculation is not unusual in the content industry. Almost every major creator operates this way. What is unusual is the simultaneous, explicit denial on one platform and documentation on the other. The second category of professionally significant content involves people, specifically the way Darcy references colleagues, collaborators, and network figures on the private account versus the way those same people appear on the public one. On the public account, the relational landscape is warm, collegial, supportive. The language of sisterhood and mutual empowerment runs through almost every collaborative reference. Colleagues are celebrated, network figures are acknowledged with the specific kind of gratitude that signals healthy professional relationships and functioning creative partnerships. On the private account, several of these same people appear in a considerably different light. Not by name, the private account is careful about that, which itself tells you something about the level of awareness involved in maintaining it. But by description, by context, and by the emotional register surrounding the references, it is possible to identify who is being discussed. And the assessments are, in specific instances, materially inconsistent with the public ones. The warmth that the public account projects onto certain relationships is not reflected in the private account's treatment of those same relationships. The gratitude is absent. In some cases, something closer to its opposite is present. This matters professionally because brand partnerships and network relationships are partly built on the perception of a harmonious, functional, creative environment. If the private account is processing those relationships in ways that suggest significant private discord underneath the public presentation of harmony, that is information that touches on the commercial and professional viability of the public persona. Brands that signed on the basis of the warm, collegial, functional version of Darcy's professional environment were making that decision without access to the private account's version of those same relationships. The third category, and this is the one that has the research community most engaged and the one that I want to handle with the most care, involves direct contradictions between specific public statements and specific private posts made around the same time. I am going to be deliberate here. I am not going to characterize these contradictions in the most dramatic possible terms because the dramatic terms are not actually the most accurate ones, and accuracy matters more than impact on this channel. What the screenshots show is this. There are posts on the private account that describe personal and financial circumstances with a candor and a specificity that is entirely absent from the public account, and that, in the instances that are most clearly documented, do not align with the version of those circumstances that the public account was simultaneously presenting. The public account's version of certain situations reads in retrospect as aspirational rather than descriptive, as the story of how things were meant to be rather than how they were. And the private account running at the same time, processing the same situations in real time, tells a version that is less aspirational and more accurate. Not dramatically different in every instance, but in the instances where the gap is clearest, the gap is not small. Now I want to talk about something that I think gets missed in conversations like this one, something that actually matters more than the contradiction itself. Why does someone build a private account in the first place? Not the obvious answer to privacy, which everyone deserves and which is not the interesting part of the question. The interesting part is this. Why does someone who has already built a massive public platform who already has the reach and the audience and the infrastructure to say whatever they want to millions of people, why does that person need a separate, private, small audience account to say the things that actually reflect their experience? The answer is the industry. And I mean that precisely. The content economy that creators like Darcey operate in has a specific and demanding set of requirements: positivity, aspiration, the performance of abundance even when the reality is complicated, the performance of harmony even when the reality is conflicted, the performance of certainty even when the reality is uncertain. These are not optional extras. They are structural requirements of maintaining a large, monetized public platform. The second you introduce genuine doubt, genuine conflict, genuine complexity into the public content, you introduce variables that the algorithm does not reward and that the brand partners did not sign up for. So where does the genuine doubt go? The genuine conflict, the genuine complexity? It has to go somewhere. Everyone needs somewhere to put it. And for Darcey, based on everything the research community has found, it went to the private account, not as a deception, as a survival mechanism, as the only available space where the performance did not have to be total. The private account is not evidence of a dishonest person. It is evidence of a person operating inside a system that makes honesty structurally incompatible with professional survival. She did not build the private account to deceive anyone. She built it because the public account left no room for the actual human being who was maintaining it. That is the architecture of what was found. And it is worth sitting with before we move to what happens next, because what happens next is about consequences. And consequences land differently when you understand the structure they are falling on. There is something else the private account reveals that I have not seen discussed anywhere in the coverage that has already circulated. And I want to bring it into this conversation because I think it is the most genuinely significant thing about this entire situation. On the private account, Darcey is a better writer than she is on the public one. I mean that literally. The captions are sharper. The observations are more precise. The humor, when it appears, is darker and more specific and considerably funnier. The self-awareness is not the performed self-awareness of the public account, the gratitude posts, the growth journey language, the carefully worded reflections that have been calibrated for maximum relatability. It is the actual, unguarded kind. The kind where someone says something true about themselves that most people would be too self-protective to put even in a private post. The woman on the private account is someone you would find more interesting than the woman on the public one. More layered, more honest, more worthy, frankly, of the loyalty that millions of people have extended to the version they were given access to. And that is the specific tragedy embedded in this story. Not the contradiction, not the brand implications, not the professional consequences that we will get to in a moment. The tragedy is this: the genuinely compelling version of Darcey Silva has been living on a private account with hundreds of followers, while a more constructed version has been broadcasting to millions. She has been hiding the most interesting parts of herself in the one space her audience could not reach. And the audience, when the researchers gave them a glimpse, did not respond with betrayal. They responded with recognition. This, they said, is who she actually is. Why couldn't she show us this? That question, why she couldn't show us this, is the one that the industry does not want to answer, because the answer indicates the industry far more than it indicates Darcey. We will be right back into the consequences, the brand implications, the contractual dimensions, the specific phrase that marketing and legal teams are using right now in conversations that Darcey has not been invited to, right after this. Stay with us. You do not want to miss the second half of this, because the second half is where the stakes become fully visible. And the stakes are not small. Now we talk about consequences, because consequences are what separate a story from a situation. And this has crossed from story into situation in ways that are already producing real-world effects that most of the coverage you have seen has not gotten close to. Let us start with the professional dimension, because it is the one that moves fastest and hits hardest and is the least visible to the audience watching from the outside. Brand partnerships, the commercial relationships that turn a large social media following into an actual income, are built on a specific foundational assumption. The assumption is that the public persona represents a reasonably complete and accurate picture of the person. Not a perfect picture, not a comprehensive one, complete enough that the brands signing on to associate their products and their audiences with that person are not operating with materially incomplete information. That assumption is doing a lot of work in every influencer deal that gets signed. And it is the assumption that a discovered private account running a contradictory parallel narrative directly challenges. There is a phrase that marketing and legal teams use when a talent's private behavior or private statements emerge in ways that contradict the public persona that the commercial relationship was built on. The phrase is representation failure. It sounds technical because it is the contractual language for the moment when the person a brand thought they were paying for turns out to be different in material ways from the person who actually signed the deal. Representation failures have consequences. They activate clauses that most talent never reads carefully enough during the initial contract negotiation. Clauses that are written quietly into every influencer agreement by lawyers who have seen exactly this situation before and who built the exit mechanism long before anyone needed to use it. The morality clause is the one people know about. The accuracy of the public representation clause is the one people should know about but rarely do. And the retroactive disclosure requirement, the provision that requires talent to inform brand partners of any material change in their public circumstances or persona, is the one that becomes most relevant in a situation exactly like this one. The brands have legal teams. The legal teams have already seen the screenshots. The conversations that are happening right now in offices that Darcey has no access to are not about whether the private account changes anything. They're about how much it changes, which contracts it touches, and what the cleanest path to resolution looks like. Clean, in this context, is a business term. It does not mean kind. It means efficiency. And the efficiency of the resolution is inversely proportional to how much public attention the situation continues to generate, which is one of the reasons this kind of story tends to accelerate once it starts moving. The more coverage it gets, the more the brands need to be seen responding to it. The more they respond, the more coverage it gets. The cycle is self-reinforcing, and it is already turning. Now let us talk about the network dimension, because it operates differently from the brand dimension, and the failure modes are different. Television networks, specifically the kind of cable and streaming network that produces content in the 90-day universe, have a complicated relationship with the personal controversies of their talent. On one hand, controversy drives viewership. A talent who is generating conversation, even negative conversation, is a talent who is bringing eyeballs to the platform. The network has always understood this. It is partially why the franchise exists in the form it does, because controlled chaos is good television. On the other hand, there is a category of controversy that crosses from useful to costly. The threshold is not about morality. Networks are not in the morality business. The threshold is about liability and about the specific kind of audience erosion that happens when the controversy is not dramatic but structural, when it does not make people angry but makes them skeptical. Skepticism is the thing networks cannot work with, because skeptical audiences do not engage with the same reliable predictability as emotionally invested ones. A private account that reveals a parallel narrative that raises the specific question of which version of Darcy has been on the show, which version has been in the confessionals, which version of her relationships and circumstances and emotional states has been captured by the cameras, introduces structural skepticism into the audience's relationship with the content. Not just with Darcy, with the franchise's entire claim to unscripted authenticity. Because if one person's public persona is a construction with a private counterpart that contradicts it, the question immediately becomes, how many people's public personas in this universe are constructions with private counterparts we have not found yet? That question is the one the network most urgently needs not to become the dominant one in audience conversations. And right now, it is becoming exactly that. Here is the piece of this that I have not seen covered anywhere in the community discussion, and it requires some careful thinking to get to, but I want to take the time to get there because I think it reframes everything. The private account was not a mistake. I want to say that clearly and precisely. It was not a lapse in judgment. It was not a momentary failure of discipline. It was a deliberate, sustained, carefully maintained decision that ran for a significant period of time without detection. The account had structural features: the non-Darcey Silva name, the small and apparently curated follower group, the absence of cross-platform references that could have linked it to the verified account that suggest active, ongoing effort to keep it separate. That level of maintenance requires self-awareness. It requires understanding explicitly and clearly that the two versions of yourself are incompatible and that the private one cannot be allowed to touch the public one because the contact would damage or destroy what the public one has been built to be. You do not maintain that kind of separation accidentally. You maintain it because you know exactly what you are doing. And that knowledge, the explicit awareness that the two accounts are incompatible, that they represent genuinely different versions of a person that cannot be reconciled publicly, is what makes the public account's performance of authenticity so specifically complicated to evaluate in retrospect. The public account has authenticity as a core value. The language of realness, the rejection of ness, the explicit claim to be showing the actual person rather than a constructed version. These are not incidental features of the content. They are load-bearing pillars of the brand. They are the reason the audience trusts the content. They are the reason the brands paid the rates they paid. And the private account's existence is not its contents. Just its existence is in direct structural tension with that claim. Because you cannot simultaneously claim to be radically, fundamentally, authentically yourself on a public platform and maintain a separate private platform where a different version of yourself has been living in parallel. The claim and the evidence cannot both be fully true at the same time. One of them has to give way. I want to talk about what happens next, not the speculation version, the documented version, based on how situations structurally similar to this one have resolved in recent content history. There are 4 paths forward from a discovered private account, and they produce different outcomes with different probability distributions. The first path is acknowledgement. Come forward, address the account directly, provide context, and attempt to bring the private narrative into some coherent alignment with the public one. The advantage of this path is that it puts the talent in control of the framing. The disadvantage is that acknowledgement confirms the thing the brands and the network most need not to be confirmed, that the public persona was not a complete representation of the person. Acknowledgement is honest. Honesty in this context is professionally expensive. The second path is silence. Do not address the account. Do not confirm or deny. Continue posting on the public account as if the private one does not exist, and let the news cycle do what news cycles do, which is move. The advantage of this path is that it preserves the public persona without explicitly confirming its incompleteness. The disadvantage is that silence in the face of documented, screenshot-preserved evidence does not read as neutral. It reads as the specific kind of silence that happens when acknowledgement is impossible, but denial is unsupportable. The third path is denial. Claim the account is not hers, that it was fabricated, that the screenshots are edited, that the metadata analysis is flawed. The disadvantage of this path is that the metadata analysis is not flawed, and the screenshots are not edited, and the community that found the account has documented the finding process with the kind of rigor that makes denial look not just dishonest, but specifically, verifiably dishonest. Denial accelerates the damage rather than containing it. The fourth path is deletion followed by silence, the path that may already have been taken by the time you are watching this. Remove the account, remove the evidence from the source, and allow the archives to hold what they hold without giving them additional material to compare against. The problem with this path is the one I mentioned earlier, and it bears repeating because it is genuinely important. Deletion is not erasure. In the content environment of 2026, deletion is relocation. The moment the account was identified, archiving began. The screenshots moved from the private account to every community archive, every research Discord, every content preservation account that exists to capture exactly this moment before it disappears. The account can be deleted. The content cannot. Which means the only path that does not exist, the path that is closed permanently, regardless of which of the 4 options is chosen, is the path back to before the account was found. That path is gone. The discovery is permanent. What changes now is only the framing of what was discovered, not the fact of the discovery itself. Let me tell you what the community's response to this has actually been, because it is not what you might expect, and it matters to understand where this goes. The dominant response has not been outrage. It has not been the pile-on that stories like this historically generate. The dominant response, the one that has characterized the conversation in the most engaged and thoughtful parts of the community, has been something closer to grief. A specific, complicated grief that comes from seeing a person more clearly than that person wanted to be seen, and finding the clearer version not monstrous, but more human. People have looked at the private account posts, the candid ones, the sharply self-aware ones, the ones that process reality rather than performing it, and they have said, quietly, in comment sections and community threads and direct messages to each other, this is who she actually is. This is the version we would have followed more loyally, loved more genuinely, connected with more deeply if she had ever let us reach it. That response is the most indicative thing about the situation, not because it is harsh, because it is kind. Because it reveals that the audience did not need the performance. The audience would have accepted and probably preferred the person. And the person did not trust that enough to test it. That is not Darcey's failure. That is the failure of every lesson the industry has taught people in her position about what audiences want, what they will accept, what they will punish, and what they will reward. The lesson the industry teaches is, give them the aspirational version. Give them the filtered, curated, managed version. Give them the story in which everything is moving toward resolution and abundance is always just around the corner. That is what gets the following and the likes and the brand deals and the network interest. The audience response to the private account suggests the lesson is wrong, suggests it has always been wrong, suggests that what people actually want from the creators they choose to follow is not the aspirational performance, but the authentic person. And that the industry has been systematically discouraging exactly that for long enough that the people inside it have forgotten it was ever possible. Here is where I want to land this, because I think the landing matters as much as the evidence, and I want to be precise about what I am actually saying. This episode is not an indictment of Darcey Silva. It is a document of what happens to a person who is talented enough to build something real, ambitious enough to maintain it, and trapped deeply enough inside a system that punishes authenticity that she needed a secret account to be herself in. The private account is not proof that she is dishonest. It is proof that the industry she operates in made honesty professionally unaffordable. It is proof that the distance between the public persona and the private reality is not a character failure, but a structural outcome. The predictable result of a system that rewards performance over truth, aspiration over accuracy, the filtered version over the actual one. She built the private account because the public one left no room for the human being running it, and the human being running it needed somewhere to exist that was not the brand, not the show, not the franchise, not the commercial relationship, not the follower count, not the engagement rate, just a place to be a person, quietly, with hundreds of people who were not there for the performance. The tragedy is not that the account was found. The tragedy is that it needed to exist. The tragedy is that an industry that profits from the performance of authenticity has created conditions in which actual authenticity requires a private account with a name and a few hundred followers to survive in. That is the system. Darcey is not the system. She is one person navigating it with the tools available to her. And the most human thing about this entire situation is not the contradictions in the screenshots or the professional consequences unfolding in conference rooms she is not in. The most human thing is this. She kept going to that account. Keep posting. Kept being honest in the one small corner of the internet where honesty was available to her. Kept showing up as herself in the place where being herself did not have a price tag attached to it. That is not villainy. That is survival. And if the audience can hold that complexity, if they can look at the evidence of the contradiction and simultaneously hold the human reality of why it exists, then maybe the response to this discovery is not punishment, but something more useful. Something like a question directed not at Darcey, but at the industry itself. Why did we build a system where the only place a person can be real is a secret account that nobody is supposed to find? The screenshots exist. The contradictions are documented. The professional consequences are already in motion in rooms that have not been made visible yet. The private account, whether it still exists in its original form or has already been relocated to the archives, has permanently changed the way the audience sees the public one. The question used to be, what is she sharing today? From now on, the question is, what is she not sharing? Every post on the verified account will be evaluated against the knowledge that another account existed, that there is a version of events being processed somewhere that the public content does not reflect. That awareness does not go away. It does not diminish with time. It becomes the permanent background against which everything the public account produces is read. The audience's gaze has changed. It has become something it was not before. Not hostile, not disloyal, but aware. Aware that the open book has chapters it was not designed to share. Aware that the person and the persona are not the same thing and never were, and that the distance between them is not small, and that the distance was maintained deliberately for a long time by someone who understood exactly what she was doing and why she needed to do it. Awareness, once arrived at, does not reverse. The audience knows what it knows. The only question remaining is what it does with that knowledge, whether it responds with the punishing judgment the content system is built to generate, or with the more complicated, more honest, more genuinely useful response that the situation actually deserves. We vote for the second one. We always vote for the second one on this channel. Because the first one is easy and the second one is true, and true is the only thing we are interested in. That is the tell-all tapes. If this episode gave you something to think about, if it gave you a way of looking at this situation that you had not considered before, then you already know what to do. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone in the 90-day community who is following this story, because this is the version of it that the other coverage is not giving them. We do not do rumors here. We do not do pile-ons. We do not do the easy version of stories that deserve the complicated one. What we do is follow the evidence, present what is documented, and trust you to draw your own conclusions from a complete picture rather than a convenient one. The next episode is already being built. There are threads in this story that we have only pulled partway out the network dimension. The specific contractual language being activated right now, and the question of whether this is an isolated situation or part of a pattern that runs wider and deeper than any single account. We are pulling those threads to their end. Turn on notifications, be here when it drops. Because the next chapter of this is not smaller than this one. It is larger, and you want to be in the room when it opens. We will see you there. Subscribe. We read every page.